All right, guys, welcome back to today's episode of 5 Minute Football. I'm going to try to do a better job with this because I'm calling the videos 5 Minute Football, and that's kind of the intent. But last time it was a 13-minute video, so I didn't do a very good job. See if we can speed this up a little bit. We're going to be looking at the shallow cross passing scheme today. The concept that we're trying to create is an apex vertical stretch, and we'll look at that in a little bit more detail when we look at the diagrams in a second. The identifiers for the concept are the shallow and the dig, but not the shallow and the dig on the same side. That would be a drive concept, which to me is usually a concept that you put on the backside of what is typically a two-man concept in order to create a flood on one side of the field. That to me is not the same as a traditional shallow cross passing scheme. So what I do when I look at concepts, I always try to say, okay, what are the identifiers? What are the routes that are primary to creating the structure that the offense is trying to generate? And in this case, it's the shallow with the dig on the opposite side. The two main variations of that are what I would call the base shallow, which is the traditional air raid shallow cross, and the dagger concept. But then there are also other variations that I really like off of it, the triangular middle flood, the triangular flood with a flat element, and the triangular flood with a rail element. So let's look at some diagrams and kind of see what that looks like. So this is the traditional air raid shallow cross. You've got goes on the outside, just kind of clearing this out. You've got a shallow coming from one side of the field to the other. You've got the first receiver or the inside most receiver on the opposite side running a dig. You can see this stem. It's a little bit different than what you would normally see on a dig. And this is pretty common across the board. Most people that run this concept will run it this way. Um, there is an outside release here by the dig player, and then he probably is going to have to try to push by and big arm this guy at the top of this route in order to get back underneath him. But the reason that you release the dig outside is very simple. This is an apex vertical stretch, as we said before. And when you have an apex vertical stretch, you're really trying to create some sort of, if I can ever get my diagram right here. Okay, when you're trying to create an apex vertical stretch, you're taking this apex player who typically lines up on or near the slot, and you're trying to put a route on top of him, and you're trying to put a route underneath him. So we're high-low in this player. We've got the shoot coming out the backside. The traditional way to read it is shallow, dig, shoot. One thing I also really like to do on the backside of this concept, you'll see some teams run a curl. And I think that's pretty good because what it gives you is the shallow and the dig on this side, which really, if you're looking at a traditional 4-3, 2 high defense, you have more space between the mic where my cursor is right there and the Sam. So I like the shallow dig better against 2 high. And then you got your curl flat against 1 high, and that can be pretty good. Especially with the shallow working inside, it may hold this hook player if it's 1 high, may hold him for just a second and keep him from getting out to the curl so that you can maintain the integrity of this stretch out here on this flat defender. Of course, I have this concept drawn left to right. You could just as easily flip the concept and run it right to left. It's the same type of principle. So that's kind of the base deal there. Now, I'm going to put this back. Now, one thing that you can do, and I really like this against quarters coverage, is run a dagger concept. And that would very simply be the same type of structure. You see different things back here. Sometimes you'll see a burst corner route back here. Here we're just going to leave the vertical there with the shoot still going to the opposite side. But for those who aren't aware or who aren't familiar with this scheme, dagger concept is just simply some type of clear out, usually a seam. Some teams will run it with a post and then a dig coming from the outside. I really like that against quarters coverage in 3rd and long. I've always thought that this was a good idea whenever you wanted to hit this dig, because if it's too high and you run it the base way, in other words, if you just run it like this, well, you can tag if the safety. Imagine there's a safety where my cursor is. If he drives the dig, you just throw the post over his head, tag a post, and throw it over his head. And that's true, but it doesn't give you an answer within the play itself. So that's why I say 3rd and long. I really like the idea of just switching those 2 routes because that's all you're doing is switching the routes of the Y and the Z, because originally the Y had the dig and then the Z had the go. Now you're just flipping it to where the Y's got the vertical route and then the Z's got the dig. You could just leave the call as shallow and call switch. I think that's a really simple way to do it. Another thing that you'll see off of the traditional look here is you'll see teams create a triangular stretch in the middle, and what they'll do is they'll run a replace route here with the F. So he'll delay, he'll wait for that H to clear, and then once the H clears, then he'll leak out and replace the H. And so that really creates a triangle. If you could look at between these points, that point, and that point, kind of creates a triangle in the middle of the field. That's a decent play. Again, I think that's something that's better against too high, where you have less of a hook presence. But it can be effective. I really like this version of the concept, and I'm going to show you a little bit of film with this one. So put the F on the side the shallows go into. So on the concept side, let them run a shoot route, okay? Or they could run a swing route, okay? So that's why I say a flat element, because it's got a flat element either way, but you could run it with a shoot, you could run it with a swing. Then you still got your shallow coming from this side, but the difference is because you no longer have the shoot route on the backside, because you've moved him to the concept side, what you can do is you can run a speed out here. Usually that's going to be, and that's not a very good drawing, but that would typically be at a depth of about 6 steps. And so you're going to speed cut this thing. Quarterback looks this way. He reads this first. Then he comes to the concept side and he reads the flat defender. If the flat defender, which is typically going to be this apex player here, if the flat defender widens to take the shoot, should be space for the shallow. If he hangs, then there should be space out here, nothing but space for the back. The thing is that if you run the concept this way, you got to tell the quarterback by his first step, and really he should have a pretty good idea pre-snap, but by his first step, he's got to know whether or not he's throwing this. Then he's progressing out to the shoot and the shallow. And then, of course, the dig becomes an option if a hook player jumps the shallow from inside, because you will have teams that are really well coached that cut crossers sometimes. So here's a look at that variation of the concept. Well, let me show you this real quick. So the other way that you could do it, and I used to do this quite a bit, is you could run a post out here and you could run a rail here. And we used to tell this guy, look, sprint through the heels of the outside receiver and do it as fast as you can. You want to get width and you want to get up the field. As soon as you break the line of scrimmage, turn your head. And so you're really stretching this right third of the field, and you're protecting against the hook player drop or jumping, cutting the crosser, or widening with the rail. And by bringing the dig inside, you're kind of protecting against that a little bit, because if they do, then you got to throw there. So the read there would be rail, shallow, dig. You could pre-snap something over here. You could tag a hitch. You could tag whatever you wanted back there as an individual route, kind of an isolation deal. Or you could just run him on a vertical. It's really up to you and what you want to do. I think that's a waste of his legs, but there are options available for the coach. So let's just kind of look at this real quick. This would be the version of the concept that I discussed. Quarterback puts his eyes to the field here first, where he's going to have the out here at the bottom of your screen. He's going to have the out. He makes his decision early. He's made his decision now. He gets his feet hot. One, hot feet, gets the ball out. Got a nice gain there and a pretty easy throw. You can see if he would have progressed to the shallow side of the concept, corner's kind of hanging a little bit there, kind of squatting. But he still would have had his shoot or his shallow, and then you got the dig working inside.